bind up the broken-hearted heartache, to open wide them prison doors. I cannot keep quiet, the song inside my skin, I feel it run like a river, I feel it running like a second wind. Come on, won't you run? Come on, won't you run free? Come on, won't you run? Come on, won't you run free? Come on, won't you dance like a prisoner released? Come on, won't you run? Come on, won't you run free? A crown of beauty for your ashes, shake with laughter instead of fear, a coat of praise instead of darkness. The God of light's gonna meet you here. Lift up your eyes now. It takes your shame. Rebuild the ruins. Resurrection is the Maker's name. Come on, won't you run? Come on, won't you run free? Come on, won't you dance? Come on, won't you run free? Come on, won't you run like a prisoner released? Come on, won't you run? Come on, won't you run free? It takes your shame, takes your shame, it takes your shame, takes your shame, it takes your shame, takes your shame, it takes your shame.
Técnicas, métodos que nós utilizamos é fruto da cooperação internacional. A própria gestão de risco, né? Como avaliar um objeto baseado em risco, é um exemplo dessa atividade. A matriz de planejamento, ela trouxe também essa visão do risco. E ela foi acelerada por um projeto depois que é do DFID, um intercâmbio com o Reino Unido, a Agência de Cooperação Internacional do Reino Unido, onde nesse projeto, que focava muito em auditoria operacional, trouxe essa ideia do GAL e passou para todos os trabalhos.
Nossos relatórios na década de 90, eles eram criticados porque eles eram muito volumosos, né, e muito descritivos. Com a cooperação internacional, o que houve foi um foco maior do trabalho, as questões descritivas, elas foram vistas como, na verdade, uma parte preliminar da auditoria, né, que teria que ficar no planejamento ou num outro tipo de trabalho que a gente chama de levantamento. E o relatório deveria responder às questões de auditoria, que são focadas nos maiores riscos ao alcance dos objetivos das agências públicas, né?
O programa de mestrado que o tribunal proporcionou para os servidores em 99 foi um convênio da presidência do TCU com a Embaixada Britânica no Brasil. Então, essa experiência foi bem interessante, porque o Brasil estava passando por dois processos de reforma. Um deles era a privatização e a criação de agências reguladoras, e o outro era a institucionalização de avaliação de programas e políticas públicas. O retorno foi do mestrado bem interessante para o tribunal, porque iniciamos um projeto de modernização dos serviços públicos de infraestrutura na época, que foi uma cooperação internacional entre o tribunal e o Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento, BID, E esse acordo previa o financiamento de ações do tribunal que pudesse modernizar a sua atuação, tanto na área de política pública, quanto na área de regulação de serviços públicos.
Antes do processo de auditoria financeira, de construção de capacidades para fazer auditoria financeira, o trabalho era com base em análises, realmente. Você trazia algumas informações e conseguia fazer evolução e fazer alguns apontamentos importantes. Com a auditoria financeira, o tribunal caminhou para poder dar uma opinião qualificada sobre a existência ou não de distorções que tornassem aquelas informações pouco confiáveis, pouco críveis, né? Talvez a mudança mais fundamental tenha sido uma mudança sobre a forma da gente olhar para o nosso trabalho. A gente olhava para as contas do governo como um trabalho essencialmente descritivo. Ou seja, a gente fazia quase que uma descrição paralela do que tinham sido as contas do governo no anterior. E a partir desse trabalho a gente focou muito na ideia de que o nosso trabalho é auditar aquilo.
A exemplo do Reino Unido, as agências reguladoras brasileiras, elas foram criadas com a ideia de que elas teriam uma discricionariedade técnica muito grande. Elas teriam ampla liberdade de escolher como regular o mercado. E nesse contexto se perguntava, o que o TCU vai poder fazer nessa fiscalização? E aí, esse grupo de trabalho coordenado pela Inglaterra estava elaborando uma série de diretrizes de como uma entidade de fiscalização superior devia auditar uma agência reguladora. E foi muito legal, porque a gente pôde aproveitar isso para a discussão que estava havendo justamente no Congresso Nacional, em algumas áreas técnicas, sobre o papel do TCU.
E a gente viu que tinha essas normas internacionais, normas ou padrões, né, de auditoria internacionais, em que nesse documento tinha toda uma orientação que foi muito útil para a gente, digamos assim, desenvolver as linhas de trabalho de auditoria em cima das agências reguladoras. Então, foi muito importante, primeiro, para a gente desenvolver o trabalho. E, segundo, foi muito importante também para a gente legitimar esse trabalho de auditoria, porque em várias situações houve um questionamento, vem cá, mas por que vocês estão fazendo sobre esse tipo de abordagem de fiscalização em cima das agências reguladoras? E a gente falou, olha, não, a gente não está tirando nada do chapéu. Isso acontece em outros países.
Em 96, se deu esse projeto lá com a Fundação Getúlio Vargas nos Estados Unidos. Isso foi uma experiência riquíssima, né? Aprendi muito, né? E gostei bastante, me apaixonei pela auditoria operacional. Tanto que a minha dissertação de mestrado foi estudando os processos de internalização de conhecimento, processos de aprendizagem, né, internos e externos, no caso externo foi a cooperação internacional, no desenvolvimento, na institucionalização da auditoria operacional no TCU. Eu participei dessa primeira experiência, quando ela foi trazida por um auditor que fez intercâmbio, e depois a gente utilizou isso na CEPOG para fazer de novo avaliação de risco de órgão, de entidade. Fizemos inclusive avaliação dos riscos da Copa do Mundo no Brasil. Muitos desses riscos está lá o TCU dizendo que ia acontecer e depois aconteceram.
Eu acho que o intercâmbio é algo permanente. Em uma instituição que se quer se dizer de qualidade, né, de excelência, que se quer se mostrar efetiva, ela tem que se basear nesse intercâmbio.
Você até poderia ter chegado nesses ganhos, mas certamente não no curto espaço de tempo em que eles ocorreram.
as técnicas e métodos que nós utilizamos é fruto da cooperação internacional. A própria gestão de risco, né? Como avaliar um objeto baseado em risco, é um exemplo dessa atividade. A matriz de planejamento, ela trouxe também essa visão do risco. E ela foi acelerada por um projeto depois que é do DFID, intercâmbio com o Reino Unido, a Agência de Cooperação Internacional do Reino Unido, onde nesse projeto, que focava muito em auditoria operacional, trouxe essa ideia do GAL e passou para todos os trabalhos.
Nossos relatórios na década de 90, eles eram criticados porque eles eram muito volumosos, né, e muito descritivos. Com a cooperação internacional, o que houve foi um foco maior do trabalho, as questões descritivas, elas foram vistas como, na verdade, uma parte preliminar da auditoria, né, que teria que ficar no planejamento ou num outro tipo de trabalho que a gente chama de levantamento. E o relatório deveria responder às questões de auditoria, que são focadas nos maiores riscos ao alcance dos objetivos das agências públicas, né?
O programa de mestrado que o tribunal proporcionou para os servidores em 99 foi um convênio da presidência do TCU com a Embaixada Britânica no Brasil. Então, essa experiência foi bem interessante, porque o Brasil estava passando por dois processos de reforma. Um deles era a privatização e a criação de agências reguladoras, e o outro era a institucionalização de avaliação de programas e políticas públicas. O retorno foi do mestrado bem interessante para o tribunal, porque iniciamos um projeto de modernização dos serviços públicos de infraestrutura na época, que foi uma cooperação internacional entre o tribunal e o Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento, BID, e esse acordo previa o financiamento de ações do tribunal que pudesse modernizar a sua atuação, tanto na área de política pública quanto na área de regulação de serviços públicos.
Antes do processo de auditoria financeira, de construção de capacidades para fazer auditoria financeira, o trabalho era com base em análises realmente. Você trazia algumas informações e conseguia fazer evolução ano a ano e fazer alguns apontamentos importantes. Com a auditoria financeira, o tribunal caminhou para poder dar uma opinião qualificada sobre a existência ou não de distorções que tornassem aquelas informações pouco confiáveis, pouco críveis, né? Talvez a mudança mais fundamental tenha sido uma mudança sobre a forma da gente olhar para o nosso trabalho. A gente olhava para as contas do governo como um trabalho essencialmente descritivo, né? Ou seja, a gente fazia quase que uma descrição paralela do que tinham sido as contas do governo no anterior. E a partir desse trabalho a gente focou muito na ideia de que o nosso trabalho é auditar aquilo.
A exemplo do Reino Unido, as agências reguladoras brasileiras, elas foram criadas com a ideia de que elas teriam uma discricionariedade técnica muito grande. Elas teriam ampla liberdade de escolher como regular o mercado. E nesse contexto se perguntava, o que o TCU vai poder fazer nessa fiscalização? E aí, esse grupo de trabalho coordenado pela Inglaterra estava elaborando uma série de diretrizes de como uma entidade de fiscalização superior devia auditar uma agência reguladora. E foi muito legal, porque a gente pôde aproveitar isso para a discussão que estava havendo justamente no Congresso Nacional e em algumas áreas técnicas sobre o papel do TCU.
E a gente viu que tinha essas normas internacionais, normas ou padrões, né, de auditoria internacionais, em que nesse documento tinha toda uma orientação que foi muito útil para a gente, digamos assim, desenvolver as linhas de trabalho de auditoria em cima das agências reguladoras. Então, foi muito importante, primeiro, para a gente desenvolver o trabalho. E, segundo, foi muito importante também para a gente legitimar esse trabalho de auditoria, porque em várias situações houve um questionamento. Vem cá, mas por que vocês estão fazendo sobre esse tipo de abordagem de fiscalização em cima das agências reguladoras? E a gente falou, olha, não, a gente não está tirando nada do chapéu. Isso acontece em outros países.
96 se deu esse projeto lá com a Fundação Getúlio Vargas nos Estados Unidos. Isso foi uma experiência riquíssima, né? Aprendi muito, né? E gostei bastante, me apaixonei pela auditoria operacional. Tanto que a minha dissertação de mestrado foi estudando os processos de internalização de conhecimento, processos de aprendizagem, né, internos e externos. No caso externo foi a cooperação internacional, no desenvolvimento, na institucionalização da auditoria operacional no TCU. Eu participei dessa primeira experiência quando ela foi trazida por um auditor que fez intercâmbio, e depois a gente utilizou isso na CEPOG para fazer de novo avaliação de risco de órgãos, de entidade. Fizemos inclusive a avaliação dos riscos da Copa do Mundo no Brasil. Muitos desses riscos, está lá o TCU dizendo que ia acontecer e depois aconteceram.
Eu acho que o intercâmbio é algo permanente. Nenhuma instituição que se quer se dizer de qualidade, né, de excelência, que se quer se mostrar efetiva, ela tem que se basear nesse intercâmbio.
Você até poderia ter chegado nesses ganhos, mas certamente não no curto espaço de tempo em que eles ocorreram.
Senhoras e senhores, solicitamos a gentileza de tomarem os seus lugares Dentro de alguns instantes, iniciaremos o segundo Seminário Internacional de Auditoria.
A grande maioria das técnicas e métodos que nós utilizamos é fruto da cooperação internacional. A própria gestão de risco, né? Como avaliar um objeto baseado em risco, é um exemplo dessa atividade. A matriz de planejamento, ela trouxe também essa visão do risco. E ela foi acelerada por um projeto depois que é do DFID, um intercâmbio com o Reino Unido, a Agência de Cooperação Internacional do Reino Unido, onde nesse projeto, que focava muito em auditoria operacional, trouxe essa ideia do GAL e passou-a para todos os trabalhos.
Nossos relatórios na década de 90, eles eram criticados porque eles eram muito volumosos, né, e muito descritivos. Com a cooperação internacional, o que houve foi um foco maior do trabalho. As questões descritivas, elas foram vistas como, na verdade, uma parte preliminar da auditoria, né, que teria que ficar no planejamento ou num outro tipo de trabalho que a gente chama de levantamento. E o relatório deveria responder às questões de auditoria, que são focadas nos maiores riscos ao alcance dos objetivos das agências públicas, né?
O programa de mestrado que o tribunal proporcionou para os servidores em 99 foi um convênio da presidência do TCU com a Embaixada Britânica no Brasil. Então, essa experiência foi bem interessante, porque o Brasil estava passando por dois processos de reforma. Um deles era a privatização e a criação de agências reguladoras, e o outro era a institucionalização de avaliação de programas e políticas públicas. O retorno foi do mestrado bem interessante para o tribunal, porque iniciamos um projeto de modernização dos serviços públicos de infraestrutura na época, que foi uma cooperação internacional entre o tribunal
Senhoras e senhores, autoridades presentes, boa tarde.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the second International Seminar of Auditing. The meeting will have as focus different approaches of risk, highlighting experiences of internal auditing under the perspective of the Institute of Internal Auditors, and the experience of inspection higher entities with auditings based on risk, highlighting the pilot experience of the FCA and the practice of the European FCAs. Besides that, we'll bring through specialists of the German cooperation and the World Bank more systemic perspectives of risk along the management public financial cycle, discussing implications to the action of inspection entities. After that, the presentations will and the recordings will be made available in the website of the event at the portal of the FCA. We'll send an email to each participant with information over the issuance of the certificate. This event is being broadcasted by the TCU channel at YouTube, or at the FCA channel at the YouTube. Please keep your cell phones turned off or in silent mode along the whole event. Now, to compose the opening table, we invite Mr. Minister of the President of the FCA, Minister of the FCA, Augusto Nardes. Your Excellency, Executive Secretary of Transparency and General Comptroller's Office, Mr. José Marcelo Castro de Carvalho. Your Director of the Institute of Internal Auditors, Mr. Benito Barra. Ladies and gentlemen, with the floor, Your Excellency, Minister of the Federal Court of Accounts, Augusto Nardes. Well, I thank for the presence of everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you at Sergio de la Correia Institute. For those who don't know, Sergio de la Correia was a great Brazilian citizen, together with Rui Barbosa, who helped to structure the Federal Court of Accounts in the years of 1890, and which gave a very good example for the FCA. Together with Rui Barbosa, Sergio de la Correia is an honor that we paid at the FCA by building this institute. That's a decision we made in 2012 before I took over the presidency, to make this auditorium for events like these and to value our auditors and to value the most important aspect that we should have as human beings, which is the dialogue. And here we are to dialogue. So I'd like to thank the presence of everyone. We have here Mr. Ibarra, who is Mexican-American. He was just telling me that. What is his name? Benito Ibarra. And Mr. José Marcelo de Castro Carvalho, who is our partner. And we worked together for a long time. But it's a pleasure to have you with us, together and through internal control and external control, we could implement a policy of efficiency, efficacy in the Brazilian nation. In a very proper moment for this meeting, we're actually going through a transition moment, and therefore the transition itself makes everyone concerned about the instability it might bring through the change. I mean, we live in a democracy which solidifies little by little in Brazil. But this morning we had a course at the Ministry of Development, MDIC, and we said, look, we're going to make a governance course for transition. That is, the new governors will have a course. Not they are not capable, but we want, through the external control and with the support of internal control, of course, we want to help Brazil to find the path for a stable development. Maybe that is the great challenge, because the country has been cyclic. We haven't had stability in its development, and these affect the life of all of us Brazilian citizens. We came to a situation of 40 million unemployed people and a lack of stability in the economy, in trust, public trust, in the trust of the nation for the authorities who made wrongdoings, and it is necessary that democracy has this stability to develop. And control is very important on this. That is, if we don't have a good control, and if we don't have auditors working to guide, it is difficult to get that we can make right decisions. And I think this new view that we established at the court, and I want to thank all the auditors, because when we started the idea of governance in 2012, when we presented the proposal to our staff as a central topic for the FCA to discuss, we couldn't imagine, Ibarra, that we could come to the stage we are at today. We advanced a lot. I mean, through a presidential decree which establishes a policy of national governance on the 22 of November 2017. And you were very important for that. I wanted to actually share the tribute with this whole team. I was telling Leonel, who's your workmate, Leonel helped a lot, like all other ministers, and the executive secretariat, as well as Minister Wagner. They took part and were very important in the process for us to build this presidential decree. 8 months of articulation. I went to visit the President, Michel Temer, and then I went to talk to the Ministry of Transparency, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Finances. And now we are building a course together with the Comptroller's Office and Internal Control to implement governance in Brazil. And today I'm very happy because MDIC already came. They already showed that they are following the governance guidance. And it made transparent that this is actually spreading throughout the ministries. It's not an isolated act of the Comptroller's Office or Planning, Ministry of Planning. This is actually getting solid in the government. And that is important, Ibarra, because the country is noticing that if we don't organize, for example, evaluation of risk, which is one of the topics you will discuss today. If we don't make decisions without evaluating risks, we can actually get the result we had. 3 years of negative growth. How much was that? Negative growth in Brazil in 3 years. 8.4 negative. What does it represent? 8.4 of negative growth going downwards. With an interruption of the fall of the GDP, about 6.6 trillion. In 3 years, it is about 20 trillion. Let's put it 8.4% on top of it. It is very close to 2 trillion reais in collection, because investors need to believe in the country. This is lack of governance. And today I was saying this morning that it is paramount to have a mid and long-term planning. Now it is in the law of governance. We have a strategic planning and to think about establishing goals for 12 years. Now imagine Brazil, a continental country without any planning in certain areas which are fundamental, like infrastructure, energy, education, or in the field of technology, IT, which is very important. To have data to be able to make decisions, to have IT governance. I mean, we didn't have the capacity to think on a mid and long term, and now we have a governance on a national level. It is a national policy of governance with a strategic planning, evaluation of risk. The ministries are preparing. Today, a youngster made a presentation in behalf of the ministry. I was very impressed. I told her, look, it was the best presentation after the ministry Minister Guardia made. And we're actually getting them to make to build a course for the high management. And this high management, people have to incorporate governance thesis to improve competitiveness, to deliver results, because today the world is competitive. Here we have a representation of auditors which represents Mexico and the US, incorporated to the Mexican and US culture, which evolve very fast. We're competing today, and somehow the South American, North America continent in Central America, they compete with Asia, which is the major discussion. That is, all this movement that Mr. Trump is doing, all this movement is not to lose his leadership on an international level. The U.S. Actually noticed that what they had to have good governance. Yes, but they had to prepare the Brazilian state to seek efficiency and efficacy within the Brazilian state, and how to improve governance if we don't have structures. And what happened in our election is a wave that shows a protests without taking position from A, B, or C, but it was very good news when the Senate actually got renewed in about 75%. So society is very unhappy with the structure of the state. without getting into the political merit of the decisions that are being made by the population. But there is unhappiness. So I think that this course is important. The European FCA is very important. The German cooperation is important. I'd like to congratulate Barbara, who is a great and important person from the German cooperation. German cooperation has been very important for the FCA. This German cooperation gave us the coverage to make the first coordinated auditing that we did on parks and reserves here in Brazil. And now we have the possibility of doing it in Africa. It will depend very much on the German cooperation. For sure, they will support us because we open an avenue to preserve the planet. We're talking to other continents. So the German cooperation was important, the World Bank also, and the European FCA, and the institution of auditors, international auditors, represented by Mr. Ibarra. I believe that can give us consistency and support to establish this planning to make feasible the economic growth and the job generation to distribute income to all American countries. So auditors are important. And I want to make a special thanks in behalf of President Raimundo Carreiro, who could not be here, but asked me through a phone call this week that came together with Ranieri, who's his chief of staff, to be present here to welcome everyone. That's what I'm doing right now. And I'd like to say that you are extremely important for the transformation of your countries. I have a dream that one day we be able to make governance. We are already doing it since Ibarra is here, and we have borders with the U.S. and Mexico, and at the same time it incorporates both cultures. We're doing now the audit of frontiers. We have to have a policy to improve governance in the borders of every place. Since I know that Mexico and U.S. have a problem, we also have a problem with several countries. And good part of the organized crime is supplied through the borders, where they put in drugs and weapons, establishing pockets of poverty in this area. So we need to create a policy to develop these areas. Our ministries of integration and the national policy of borders and other ministries need to get together to strengthen this area of the boundaries to make possible generation of income and reduce or control crime. And once again, all the auditors are important in this process, and we propose this. I was the rapporteur of this issue, because we're not going to be able to fight. Mexico has a problem, U.S. has a problem, we have a problem. We all have difficulties to manage this issue, both in the major cities such as Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo and any capital in Brazil, as well as it is difficult in the U.S. To improve border governance is fundamental. So this audit is ongoing. And once again, the wisdom, the knowledge, and the capacity of the auditors will be paramount for us to finish this audit next year. So you see how important it is. I can't forget also Endosai. I can't forget Endosai. We presided today the Norm Committee. A while ago I was talking to Paul about this issue, because our technical staff, I'm mentioning Paula, but I could say any of them, I couldn't mention any of them. They actually rendered good services in this international, this committee, this professional standards committee, to make on a world level what we presided. This guidance in an international level. I'd like to mention our Joy Dagoberto. You've been helping us together with Claudio Castelo Branco and with the whole staff, that we are available to advance more and more in this. And I'd like to mention that from an articulation that we did, and I'm going to close my speech, we were able to establish the presence of Intosai system to 2020. 2022 in Brazil. This is something we started thinking about 6, 7, or 8 years ago before I presented LACEFT. I said, the FCA will preside NTSI one day and will be able, with this technical team, because thanks to our auditors, Dagoberto, you went with me to some international events, and I feel that we will make a major contribution, not only doing this South-South cooperation, which is important with the support of the German cooperation, but also to make, maybe Barbara, that's my dream. I will mention a dream that sometimes it might happen. Maybe in 2022 we're able, together with the support of the German cooperation and the European Court of Auditors, with NTSI, we might be able to make a global audit to preserve biodiversity, parks, and the planet, and so preserve life, which is the most important, to preserve water, according to the SDG objectives. So thank you very much for your presence. You are very important to transform not only Brazil, but your countries, to transform mankind, to make it more solidarity. Solidarity is important, that we are more capable to dialogue instead of fight. We need to have solidarity, dialogue, and union. That's what the world needs right now. Thank you very much.
Now, the Executive Secretary of Transparency and of the Controller's Office, Mr. Marcelo de Carvalho, will have the floor now. Good afternoon. I first would like to greet Minister Augusto Nardes and thank for the invitation to participate in the International Seminar on Auditing. And I would like to greet Mr. Benito Barra for his presence here. And we will very soon have other meetings another meeting in Foz do Iguaçu to deal with this auditing part. And also I would like to greet all of the colleagues of the TCU, of the Comptroller's Office and internal audit entities. And at first I would like to mention that I'm very glad to participate in this seminar dealing with risk management and governance. And it's good to have Minister Nardes present here. And you having the opening words is very interesting because we could follow the efforts to bring this topic to the surface, which is governance. And it was a great effort that we made, and in certain moments we realized there was the need for a better clarification of the largest goals to be reached, and the difficulty that the public administration has in perceiving the difficulties of implementation and the creation of strong institutions that sustain the public administration. And during this period, this was very tiring, but also very rewarding. And I'm sure, Minister, that within a few years, the dream that you had will become true, and definitely will be, all of these efforts will be remembered and also recognized. Also, I would like to mention the work that we carried out with the Ministry of Planning, which was the normative instruction number 1 of 2016 that dealt with risk management. When this normative instruction was created, we had the perspective of trying to, as it was mentioned, trying to support the public administration and supporting the public manager in the best decision making and the best quality of the management of the public management. In reality, unfortunately, and I put myself as a a participant in this process. Us as audit entities, we have evolved, but the administration did not did not follow. There is in our model, in the country's model, a large volume of rules and regulations that on one hand we understand the nature of each one of them, but on the other we realize there are increasingly more difficulties in implementing these regulations. Therefore, there is a lack of security, and the manager suffers with this lack of security. And when we deal with risk management, when we show that there is a focus, that he can perceive the main issues and risks, it at least brings security to the manager. So by mitigating these issues, the manager can show that he was really present in, at least in the most relevant topics. So it is a process that we realize very clearly to be an evolution, that on one hand, on one hand, it goes towards a new path, which is debureaucratization and simplification of administration through the perception that the public manager needs necessarily to perform their policies more efficiently and not keep policies that are no longer relevant. Some policies that when we assess them, they go back to 20, 30 years ago when there were no technological ways of communicating and all of the technology that the population have access to nowadays. So all of this is outdated, and people continue to use them without questioning it. And all of these movements will allow for an improvement and enhancement of the administration, and us as internal audit entities, and on behalf of the external audit as well, we're making an effort to support too. We're audit institutions, but we need to help the ones who want to manage properly, and this effort is a part of our everyday conception of each one of the colleagues, of the managers of each one of the institutions, and it is surely part of the vision of EEA. I thank you again for participating in this seminar, and I continue to, so the CGU together with the TCU will going to continue to make an effort for the best for the country. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I now undo the opening panel, and I request the authorities to take back their seats in the first line of the auditorium, in the first row of the auditorium. Thank you. We will now start the first panel of this seminar.
informamos as senhoras e aos senhores que
We inform you that questions must be made in written form and handed to the receptionists. They will be answered at the end of each panel. We also request you to inform in the form your email addresses so that in case there is no time for replying your question, the speaker can address your reply properly. Starting the activities of this first panel, we will invite to moderate it Mr. Secretary of Methods and Support of External Control, Mr. Dagomar Henriques Lima. We now invite Mr. Vitor Art, the Secretary of International Relations of the TCU. Mr. Rafael Torres, the Senior Auditor of the Secretariat of International Relations of the TCU. We also invite Mr. Wilfred Aquilina, the auditor of the European Auditing Court. And once again, we invite to the panel to participate this time Mr. Benito Ibarra, the Director of the Internal Auditors Institute. We also invite Mr. Marcelo Chaves, the Secretary of External Control, Health External Control of the TCU. Ladies and gentlemen, with the word, the moderator of this panel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the presence. Now we will immediately go to the first panel, and I would like to hand the floor to Mr. Vitor and Mr. Rafael. This is my daughter when she learned how to ride a bike 3 years ago, It was really a really special day that was unforgettable as a parent. I don't know if you have thought about it, how much, if there is a simple scenario such as this in the human knowledge. I will talk about the bicycle, the asphalt, and the park. The city park of Brasilia was planned by Lúcio Costa with landscaping by Burle Marx. They were Brazilians that had an extraordinary knowledge. The bicycle appeared in Europe in the 19th century with important contributions from Germans, Scottish people, and English people. The asphalt was used for the first time in roads in Babylon 7 centuries before Christ, but this technique was enhanced along the centuries, but only achieving perfection not last century. And I was able to teach my daughter to ride a bike due to what I learned when I was a child. Now, if we were just thrown into the world, if we didn't learn anything beforehand, I think we wouldn't survive. And if we did survive, we would live a very harsh life, a very primitive one. Perhaps that image with the bicycle, perhaps that was not the image of my daughter riding a bicycle. Perhaps it would be something like that. That could be the reality of her own, or even ourselves. Animals, they transmit knowledge to their offspring. The phenomenon of cultural transmission was identified in chimpanzees, dolphins, even rats and fish. So what makes the human being develop technology to the point of creating such wonders? I would say that above all, what allows us is the complex language of the human being. The language involves the consolidation and the transmission of lessons learned and good practices. The writing potentializes language even further, allowing knowledge to be stored along time and space, throughout time and space. My daughter learned how to read before she learned how to ride a bike. So the knowledge of centuries of knowledge was available to her. In other words, the written word substantializes knowledge, proportion of allowing the dissemination of good practices and techniques. This original stone where we have the Hammurabi Code, it was a set of written laws of the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia, still exists almost 4,000 years later. It represented the establishment of the rule of law. In fact, the creation of written laws have been allowing the interchange, the exchange among institutions in different countries. And with that, we have several advances for the humanity. This exchange between institutions, independently of the regulations, it allows for leaps of economy and of knowledge. Embrapa in the 1970s started doing scientific cooperation internationally in excellency centers, and they defined that as the focus of the company. So Embrapa became an international reference and was decisive for the fostering of the Brazilian agribusiness. And in terms of mandate and activities, we also are very important institutions internationally. If you saw the video, we have our external control secretary, and he said that the great majority of the techniques and methods that we have are fruit of the international cooperation. In Buenos Aires, when we elected the next president of the OLACEF, of the Latin American Committee of External Audit Institutions, we're all doing very interesting things, and we have to coordinate among the controllers to seek synergy. The personal interchange of good practices does not benefit from the all of the potential of the international cooperation among the institutions. The consolidation of this provides more benefit. A very robust process of systematization of rules guarantees a technical quality of the registration of the knowledge, because it provides a more in-depth reflection of this registration, but it also allows that strong aspects among the practices of the different countries it allows it to be adopted. International regulations can be always perfected and updated, and also serve as basis for training programs. For example, the proportion that the society started demanding from the government efficient public services, the SAIs, they started learning to perform the performance auditing, as it is known. TCU in the 1990s sent auditors to training programs in the United States, and also we had a project with the UK that allowed for the promotion of this knowledge among the court. We also had the PAS of the International Organization of SAIs. And with that, we coordinated a group on performance audits. And when the legitimacy of TCU to perform this type of control was questioned by the Congress, the then president of TCU, Mr. Ubiratan Aguiar, he fought these questionings, and also the regulations that were created by PAS, they have allowed the creation and development of a virtual course on that topic that has trained over 1,000 auditors in Brazil and other 800 students from other countries. And this has strengthened the capacities of SAIs to perform these courses in Latin America as a whole. Currently, these regulations are the foundation so that the committee of OLSF, of the Intersize, we have this massive course on performance auditing, and once this course is ready, it will train thousands of auditors in Brazil and abroad with a very cheap, with a very economic benefit. Also, we have the insights, the international standards on financial auditing. It has realized that we weren't performing financial auditings according to the best international practices. According to the World Bank, we are now getting this capacity more and more, and now we have transformed the methodology of assessing the accounts of the government, and this will have historical consequences. Currently, we are preparing international regulations that are specific and high level for SAIs with jurisdictional powers, such as the SAIs for account courts. So not only will the court be able to contribute to the experience of 150 years, but also we will be able to do an international benchmarking, getting to know the best practices of the courts of Spain, Chile, Italy, and other countries. I believe that it will be possible for us to strengthen some aspects of these judging aspect of the court, and also enhance the TCU by itself. But how to guarantee, how to ensure that this process will work out fine, how to ensure that people will be engaged, that the best specialists will be engaged, and the best practices will be used, and all of the documents will be correctly used and translated. The answer is that we should have a robust process of planning and for the regulations. There should be a coordination of the expert community, and there should also be a due process for the revision, approval, and promotion of international rules created as such. Very briefly, I just described the work, the role of the Professional Standards Committee, the PSC, that the court has been the chairing ever since the last year. When the court took over this responsibility, which was one of the most important roles that the court has performed, chairing this committee, we had the mandate of implementing deep changes in the implementation of international rules. So this is a very important role that PSC has in this world in which we try to enhance techniques and transmit knowledge to our children. Mr. Rafael Torres, who has been heading these efforts, he will detail to you this role and the results we have achieved. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, in 2016, INTOSAI restructured its normative framework. Until then, we had all documents that were part of this normative framework classified the same way as a norm or standards in a general way, being that they had a different nature from one another. So in this new normative framework, we have here these documents classified fundamentally into three main groups. One is a group of principles, which are documents towards the working of SAIs, like ethics or quality control, independent of SIIs. And we have the middle group, which are the norms itself. Norms on a strict sense. They say what auditors should obey and fulfill to carry on a work where we intend to be adherent to the international norms. And the third group of the GIDs, which are guidance and guidelines which ease the implementation of SAIs and to give guidance to the realization of works on specific topics, environmental audit or information technology audit or public debt audit and so forth. Now here in the back, what matters is to have rules that are of quality and which are recognized through its credibility by the community that is interested. And for this, you need to have, as Victor said, you need to have a proper and robust process to produce these norms. We need specialists producing these norms in a proper process of production for these norms, with the establishment of accountability and steps to be followed, and etc. Now, INTOSAI, along the years, have progressed a lot in this issue of establishment of norms, but there are a lot of space for professionalization and specialization of this process. That's why INTOSAI in 2016, together with the establishment of this new normative framework, established several other alterations in its structure of production of norms. And it was the period when the TCU actually took over the presidents and leveraged all these transformations that we intend to generate. So one of the elements that we mentioned that are relevant is to have qualified auditors producing these norms. And these auditors are on higher fiscalization in entities of all around the world, and they are organized in subcommittees and work groups according to their specific expertise. So it is up to DFC to get people with the necessary competences to write the rules that will talk about several topics. Now, one point that was diagnosed as weak and needed to be improved is that today norms are produced fundamentally counting on the work of auditors who are on the FSs and dedicate only part of their times in the production of these norms, and simultaneously with the work that they have in their own institutions. And this causes a certain problem with regards to planning of the works and foreseeability and deadlines where these works have to be presented. So PSC presidents elaborated a proposal that was recently approved to structure what we call a function of permanent technical support. You need to have a group of people permanently dedicated to this, which will be supporting all this process of norm elaboration. Another relevant point is the issue of quality control of the documents that are produced. I mean, you have people who are capable of writing these documents, but it's important to have another instance that guarantees the quality of these products. So today you have a group of specialists also recruited in the FSs around the world, which have the responsibility to guarantee the quality of these norms and the whole consistency of the normative framework as a whole. The president of PSC leads this the selection process of these people who are part of this forum. Also, is very fundamental for the strengthening of this process to have the contribution and the participation of external entities with renowned capacity and credibility to give support to the process that is developed. So traditionally, for many years, INTOSAI counts with the collaboration of IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, and the World Bank, who is here represented, also of the IAI, also represented here, and our president of the PFC tried to amplify this universe of external entities which participate and contribute for this process of norm elaboration. We currently have GIZ also participating, OECD besides other institutions. Of course that we have several challenges ahead, and one of them is to migrate the previous normative framework to this current one that I showed you. Because this is not limited to a simple reclassification of documents. There is a series of documents that have their content reviewed and solidified to improve its quality. Also, the issue of monitoring the due process. There is a due process that has been approved with all stages that are necessary, with the several people who are accountable for these stages. And PFC is the committee that is responsible to assure that this due process is followed step by step, and that is a requisite that is important for the quality of the documents that are produced. Another point is also the modernization of the communication with the community interested in international norms. Today, access to documents and norms of INTOSAI is made through the website insight.org, but this is just a repository of documents. People go there, access the documents they want, they download the document, then that's it. The idea now is to modernize and transform this website into a much more effective instrument of communication to the people who want to use international standards. And planning the future development of this normative framework. It is important for the organization to know where they want to reach, where they want to see this normative framework in the future. So this year, in the presence of PSC, we started this discussion within the organization, and we are actually harvesting the results of the establishment of this long-term view for this normative framework. And this is another point that is important, which is it is necessary to identify which are the main needs of governmental auditors around the world. We need to identify what are the main gaps that we have today in the normative framework, so that you can plan the works according to what is priority. So it is just this planning that we call SDP, Strategic Development Plan, which is a plan of development for norms, in which a whole consultation to the community, both FS community as well as our external partners, are consulted to identify which are the most relevant norms to work with and to produce. We are today in the middle of a first plan which covers the period of 2017 to 2019 and the period of implementation of this plan. And we are already planning the second plan, which will cover a longer period, 2020 to 2025, so that we can actually foster this long-term view, and we force PSC to coordinate the whole process, both the preparation of the plan as well as the management and the monitoring of the implementation of this plan. Because today, or before, documents were produced without any solidified and coordinated planning. It was just individual initiatives that not necessarily met the demands of the auditors and FSs around the world. Besides this relevant role in the issue of norm production, the president of PSC guarantees to TCU a seat in the main instances of decision of INTOSAI. So TCU has today a prerogative of participation into the decisions of the organization, establishment of priorities, identification of the greater risks, so that SIs are subject, and the planning of the future of the organization as a whole. And walking towards the specific topic of our seminar, today, this is a topic that is present in the agenda of TCU and other control institutions in the country. We have here ESI 100, which is one of the main norms of the normative framework that brings the fundamental principles of auditing the public sector. And this establishes in several moments the relevance of the consideration of risk in the auditing works. And TCU, which is in a process of implementing these norms internally, identified that this was a topic that they needed to advance. So TCU has tried to incorporate this issue in their auditing works. And we see here a very concrete example, a direct example of the positive impact that international norms and the good international practices have in the perfectioning of the control work in the country. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Victor. Victor showed us the importance of the professional consensus registered in a way that we can build knowledge along the years on top of this material. And a criticism that we make to auditing norms is that sometimes people identify norms as something that is old, molded, or related to a notary. In fact, these are just the best professional practices. And there is a risk of these norms to age and to mold. Yes, and for this we have the mechanism that Rafael showed, the institutions, rules, procedures to guarantee that these documents are up to date and meet the demands to the best practices. Now I would like to invite Wilfred to make his presentation. Wilfred is auditing based on risk in the context of operational.
Thank you very much. First of all,
Muito obrigado. Obrigado pela oportunidade de estar aqui.
I come from the European Court of Auditors, which is based in
Tribunal
Luxembourg.
Europeu.
It's basically the institution that audits the external auditor of the European Union. I hope that by sharing our experience of how we do our work, it might inspire you or even help you in giving you ideas of how things can be addressed and how we are all facing reality and finding the best ways to work around it as well. My presentation, I hope I won't make it too long, is basically covering two key elements.
Dois
I will
elementos
first
chave.
start by giving
Eu vou começar dando a vocês uma introdução, só para beneficiar todo mundo, o que nós estamos fazendo no Tribunal de Contas Europeu. e uma definição bem rápida de como nós interpretamos a auditoria de risco e desempenho, e depois vamos olhar em
and how we track the strategic risks at a very corporate and strategic level, and then I'll go down to the individual engagement, how we actually assess risk in an individual performance audit. I hope by doing this I'm sharing things that are common to all of us, and they will be useful for you as well. Okay, so first I'll start with a very brief introduction. The ECA, the European Court of Auditors, is based in Luxembourg. It's a very small country, but it actually is important for covering quite a large area of the European continent. So basically here we have 28 members. Each member is nominated by a member state, and we're an institution with about 900 professional staff. Myself, I come from a small island, Malta, which is at the very bottom there of the map as well. So you could see the involvement, engagement of people from across all Europe in the European institutions as well. So, okay, the European Court of Auditors, what do we do? Why are we there? What do we stand for? First of all, we are there to carry out a very important role. And so I'm linking a bit to what was mentioned as well earlier before, because even in Europe we have always this issue of trust. Institutions, public institutions need to be trusted, and there's always this skepticism, this worry from the normal European citizen, the person in the street, and even maybe some political rhetoric as well, of what is actually happening in the public institutions. So we have a very important role to play, and if we don't play it well, we are not giving our full best to the European Union. So the first thing for us is to obviously do our work in a very professional way and to carry out audits of all EU finances. At the same time we are doing this, we are automatically, or even we should be automatically contributing to the overall EU financial management, because our reports are not showing that everything is done well or everything is rosy. We do try and show where things are done well or where things could be learned from one area and strengthened in other areas. But the most important thing is actually that we give suggestions, key recommendations, key conclusions that can help legislators, member states, governments, etc., to find the best way of how to strengthen and improve the European Union, which at the moment is passing through a lot of challenges and is at a crossroad facing a number of issues. So if we don't deliver, we don't perform well by identifying what is really at risk at the EU and finding ways of how we can contribute with our own independent, objective analysis, then we are not completing our mission completely. So this is where we get our drive. The next thing as well is that we are promoting accountability and transparency. And this is obviously key for building the trust in the institutions. And we are also seen, or it's very, very important, that we are the guardians of the interests of the Union. So we are there to even safeguard the interests of the citizen. So this sort of encapsulates the role and why are we there and what are we doing from the European Court of Auditors. Like was mentioned before, we have obviously a strategy as well, and the strategy reflects the times. And the strategy we are adopting at the moment is basically a contribution to how we can help foster trust in the EU. Again, the same issue of trust. And how can we do this? We basically, if you look at the top part of the diagram, we're saying we can improve the functioning of the EU, and also we can improve on the understanding of the EU. I mean, this is one of the key issues that we face. People do not always understand how the EU works and what are the roles and what are the contributions that it can give. And finally, we also give an insight of what's working well and what's not working well. And there, obviously, our professionalism and our insights and objective criteria are very crucial. Just like any other audit institution, we produce a number of products. We have the more traditional role, which is basically the annual report, which is financial and compliance work. We also produce annual reports for about 50 EU bodies and agencies. And then we produce what we call special reports, which are basically performance audits in most cases, or even review-based products, which are becoming more and more useful during debate at the EU level, which include things like reviews, landscape reviews, etc., where sometimes we cover work, we reflect work that has already been covered in other reports, and highlight, identifying the risks or key areas which should be the focus of the EU. And we also ask sometimes through legislation to provide opinion on our opinion on how the legislation is being proposed by the Commission. And there again, we normally highlight the risks as well that certain legislation or proposals are covering or not covering. So just quickly, I'll link, this is our main priorities for our work up to 2020. As you can see, the EU has a number of competencies which are very essential for the overall management or the overall collaboration and of the Union. And this gives you an idea of how we are reflecting or mirroring the situation that we face across the continent. And this is how we then link it in our work program to our work. So there's a clear link between what we identify as being key overall risks at EU level and how we transform that into special reports or reports that we create out of our own initiative. So, very quickly, I mean, I'm sure all of you know what risks means, but the issue with risk, it can have different meanings, and it can depend a bit on the context. I mean, even talk about someone being risk averse or having an appetite, a risk appetite, etc. So there are ways of how one can interpret this. At the EU, the most important part for us is basically, when it comes to risk, is whether the EU aims or the EU objectives are being reached, and also whether money that's been included in the EU budget is well spent in a most economic, efficient, and effective manner. So this is how we foresee risk. Maybe in your national context, you might consider risk also having other perspectives. So this is important just even for you to compare with the way things are seen from different angles. And obviously, I think we should mention that we're talking here about risk, which is a possibility, a likelihood, and an impact that something might happen, that there's an occurrence, or a set of circumstances, which can lead to an adverse effect to the organization. And here we're not talking about minor risks or things that are over-controlled, where there's too much control. Here we're talking about risks that could lead to large financial loss, fraud, loss of reputation, or a failure to deliver. So obviously, losing always that public trust, the issue of confidence in the institutions, and why are we paying so much taxes and funds to the institutions, and why are they delivering or not delivering, actually. So in order to be able to position ourselves to address these risks very well, we look at it from two different perspectives. And I hope with my contribution here, I will be able to provide you with some insights, because I used to work in a unit which was more responsible for looking at strategic and corporate risks. And now I'm working in a unit which is the Quality Control Department, which looks at how auditors are integrating risk or using risk in the conduct of their performance audit. So I'll start with the first dimension, which is basically the tracking of EU risk at a strategic level. So the court has been over the years monitoring the risks. We do this for one key reason. First of all, we're looking at our own strategy, our longer-term view of where we want to go and what are the issues we want to cover in our work. But also we're looking at it from a shorter-term basis, basically for our annual work program, the annual planning that we do. And in the past, this is something that we used to be done quite well at the department level, so individual level, and to a certain extent was also done at a corporate level, where auditor and a very small team would look at all key developments, new legislation coming out, new proposals, new issues, crisis, problems, stagnation issues, etc., that are affecting the European Union. What we've done over the years is also we try to produce, and we've created a series of these, what we call policy scans, where we look at every policy area of the EU, and we describe not only the area of the policy, but also we give a clear summary or analysis. What are the key risks that are the result of an evolution of new developments or current situation, etc. So we document the overall indication, we give an overall indication of where are these risks, and through these policy scans, we are able to identify areas which we could audit. So basically scanning the whole environment, etc. I won't go into too much detail because I'm running a bit short of time, but basically these policy areas could be also broken down to depending on how big the policy area is. We could have interlinkages, cross-cutting risks, etc. And the system will also exploit the knowledge and expertise within the court. How? Because what we're doing is basically we're asking the key people who are working in each policy area to analyze and identify the key developments. Then we use the reviewing systems within each directorate to be able to validate and go through the assessment. And finally, there's also a horizontal team that is giving a global outlook to ensure consistency, etc. So basically, with these broad range of policy scans, which we put available in our intranet site, all staff within the court can easily refer to it and can also use it for their own planning or assessment when they're doing their own audits. Obviously, what is very important is ensuring consistency and a structured approach, and also encouraging collaboration between different departments and different audit teams. We're also using risk when we come to propose audits. Every year we produce, say, about 100 proposals of where we could audit for the following year in performance audit area. And from these, we need to filter and shortlist those that will make it to the final round of audits. And here again, we're using risk as one of the areas to identify relevance, and obviously then to use it as well to see the impact that such proposals would have. Once the audits have been selected for the following year to be carried out, each auditee needs to prepare a plan. This is obviously part of the process of any audit cycle. And our audit manual clearly states that in order to be able to create a plan, an audit planning memorandum, we need to have a clear assessment of the risks, including the impact and the occurrence and even the residual risk that is left afterwards. So here we have created a 4-step procedure, which I will briefly explain of how we're doing it. The key point here is basically that we are able to document, to analyze very carefully what are the risks to that particular specific area, and to also build a careful, rigorous analysis of what could be the main issues that we should address in our final report. So just briefly going through the different steps. The first step that we carry out is basically we ask each audit team to look at the overall context, at the overall environment, the whole policy area that is going to be audited, or that part of the area, and to gain a full understanding of that area, basically understanding its governance, understanding the legal scenario, the key actors, the key processes, if there are any major changes that are going to happen, etc. And not only that, but to identify also those risks that are putting at hazard or putting at risk the whole aim of that policy area or the overall objective. And also to identify what controls are there, or what controls do we expect to find in those areas. All this is documented. And we do this because we go to the second step, which basically means identify those possible risks and also analyze which are the most critical and significant. I will explain more in the next slide, a bit more detail about this. The third step is examining how the main risks are then being managed by the auditee. So here we need to get more into detail of what is the auditee doing, what are the management controls there, and to also try and build our own judgment and view of what is the level of residual risk left, i.e., after all the management controls in place, what is the level of risk which you consider as being left, and how high or how low or medium that risk is. Finally, in step 4, we're looking at basically using this understanding of risks to be able to formulate our audit questions and the overall scope of what we want to cover. So just very briefly going through the 4 steps, we find it very important, especially when we are reviewing the work of different audit teams, that the first thing that is very important to have is have the most up-to-date information and have all the critical information to gain a very good understanding of that area. I mean, one should not undermine this process and say this can be collected during fieldwork. I think to be able to understand what are the key questions and what are the key issues that need to be covered, it is very important to identify those factors that are formulating that policy area, and also what are the risks that are being done. Behind me you can see a number of diagrams that we use, and I heard as well that even diagrams are very commonly used as well at the TCU. So these are all ways of how you can graphically depict ways of how risks can be analyzed and how risks can be identified and where are the key points. The second step that we do is then we try to identify the risk. So obviously this is a bit of a brainstorming session at this stage. One needs to get the whole team around and start asking questions. What can go wrong? What can be the risks? What resources are at risk? what assets are at risk, where does the risk lie, what are the factors, what can be the cause, etc. So, and obviously understanding what is the consequence of that impact, etc. Why we're doing all this? Because then obviously we need to put all this in a table and be able to decide on how we're going to group those risks and what are the areas of risk that we're going to put into the picture. And here we give a lot of emphasis in how the risk is defined. So basically we shouldn't just be stating the problem, but it should also be stating what we think are the cause of that problem and also what do you think are the likely consequences of that problem as well. So again, you can see the rigor that comes in the process. You have to be quite disciplined in making sure that it's not just a question of documenting something, saying which are the risks, but actually identifying which are the key risk areas and also documenting well exactly what are the main issues that one faces in each area. And once this is done, the team would go through a sort of process of filtering till we come with a final shortlist. That final shortlist is then goes through another process where we try and identify the likelihood and impact and the overall risk level, whether it's high, medium, and low, and also assessing what is the level of management response to those risks that we've shortlisted. And this comes to the residual risk level, which is basically the key area, the key element that we take into consideration when defining the overall objectives of the audit. As a final step, we are using the risk analysis to define the audit questions. We use techniques which probably use as well as issue analysis and identifying which are the possible audit questions and the hierarchy of those questions, and then building the criteria, etc., to support those questions. And we do this to be able to identify also the scope. And here, obviously, this links to the overall relevance and the overall resources that we allocate to the audit, etc. So at the end, it becomes a bit of a process of making sure that the whole exercise that we've done, identifying the risks, finding which risks we're going to cover in the performance audit, etc., are actually feasible and achievable for the time and resources allocated to the audit. Okay, I can stop here for the time being, and I invite questions later on.
Obrigado, Wilfred. Nós vamos deixar as questões para o final do painel. Bem, e o Tribunal de Contas Europeu, né, ele foi convidado não só porque ele é vice-presidente do PSC, né, coordena o processo de elaboração de normas junto com o TCU, mas também porque ele é internacionalmente reconhecido como um tribunal que usa as melhores práticas em auditoria. E uma característica interessante do Tribunal de Contas é que ele documenta essas práticas e coloca na internet. Então,
they record the practices and they put it online. So it influences a lot of practices of courts and controllers officers of other countries through these guidelines that they publish that are used worldwide. So why have we invited them to talk about risk management? Because this is a challenge. This approach is the standard, but in auditing it is not. It is a process that is increasingly being built, hence the importance of Wilfred's speech. Now I would like to invite Mr. Benito Ibarra to talk about auditing based in risk and internal auditing.
No? Ah, there you go. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Whenever I get a chance to come to Latin America, it's a great thing. I don't do it often. I used to do it where I used to work, and when this
Muito. E essa oportunidade, quando ela surgiu, eu realmente quis vir. Aqui é muito quente e a hospitalidade é ótima. E é ótimo estar aqui em Brasília.
Thank you for, once again inviting me. So I am here representing the Institute of Internal Auditors. I am on the global board for the IIA, so I'm one of those stakeholders who relies on the information coming from the auditor of the organization. So I'm in a unique position to give a different perspective here. And what you'll see in my presentation, in addition to the risk-based focus that we are talking about today, is also some of the other focus of the IIA with regard to the public sector, providing guidance to the public sector, which means the government sector of auditing, and also ways to collaborate with internal auditors. I know I've gotten some questions regarding that, so I hope it's beneficial for you. Good. So here's my agenda for today. As I mentioned, there's a mixture of things in addition to the risk-based focus that we have talked about so far. So first of all, what is the IIA? Some of you know the IIA. It was founded in 1941. We have over 190,000 members worldwide, 40% of which are in the public or government sector of auditing. This is a recent recognition for the IIA, and there is a conscious effort to expand and strengthen our support of the government sector of auditing. So that's part of the reason I'm here, in addition to the opportunity to collaborate and partner with the group. We have standards, which we term the International Professional Practices Framework, or the IPPF, and we administer and give the CIA exam, Certified Internal Auditor, which is the premier certification for internal auditors in the profession. Here are some examples of public sector or government sector guidance that the IIA has put out relatively recently, and there are more that are being developed. So whenever I get the chance, another thing I'd like to say is there are opportunities for you to contribute to this guidance. As I mentioned, 190,000 professionals worldwide. That's a vast amount of perspective, lots of different things, lots of different arenas, and lots of different ways to perform and conduct audits that we have access to, that we have perspective of, that all go in to the guidance that we put out. So again, a good opportunity for you to engage. And with that, let me talk a little bit about, what you heard earlier. It's not common for somebody like a minister to come before you and issue their vision. He shared with you a vision of the future. And what I heard, to sum it all up, is that this is a great time to be an auditor, especially here in Brazil. There is an appetite for more. There is an appetite to do better. And you heard it firsthand. You must be the champions of the profession, and you must own this vision. You must own the challenge to make the profession better. And with that comes discomfort, because with any change, there is discomfort, right? There is a defense mechanism that goes into place with regard to somebody wants to change what I do. It works. I know what I'm doing. Why are we going to change it? Be open. Be open-minded. I have myself personally been challenged with change in organizations, and I have resisted it. And it's always to my detriment when I do that, because what I see is as the process evolves and gets better, I see that there were opportunities missed for me to contribute, for me to add my perspective and my experience and my knowledge. So again, I urge you to engage and show the leadership that the minister, the leadership, is asking of you. It's, again, a great time to be a professional auditor, especially here in Brazil. So congratulations. I do hope that you take the challenge here. And one way to think about it is, think of yourself personally, every one of you. Can you answer the question, how am I leading, or how am I engaging in this effort to make things better? And if you can't answer that, or it takes you a long time, really think about it, because you really do get a lot out of contributing and being a part of a change like this. I urge you really to take advantage of it. So when we examined the IIA and INTOSAI and the potential to collaborate more, some of the things that came out were that we have common goals, right? Greater accountability, transparency, effectiveness and efficiency of the organizations that we're auditing. In the public sector or government sector, we all know that we are providing assurance to the stakeholders, our public, with regard to how those organizations are operating. We are building trust. We are upholding the public trust, right? So when you consider auditing in general, it's the same thing. No matter external or internal audit. That's what we do. We are upholding the public trust, the stakeholder trust in the organizations that we're auditing. As a member of the public, when you read an audit report, you're getting insight into how the organization who you pay taxes toward is using your money. Sometimes the picture isn't very, very nice, but it's what causes change. And again, there's change, right? You as auditors are involved in making change for the better, for the public. So as a profession, you should be used to this. This is healthy. We have a long-standing relationship. We are in the process, if it hasn't been done already, of recertifying the Memorandum of Understanding. I brought that with me, and the IA is very happy to have done that and be participating with the organization. We have representation on the committees, right? We've talked about the PSC. We've talked about other key initiatives, potentially, that we are working on, again, to strengthen auditing in general. Very similar approaches when you consider what internal auditors do, again, versus what external auditors do. Again, it's about upholding the trust, providing assurance to stakeholders. We both have standards, and we both know the importance of independence and objectivity. Auditors, again, are trusted to provide a glimpse, a picture of what's happening in the organization. We are not the mouthpieces of management or of the organization. We produce reports that give insight, accuracy, and truth. So a table, right, to look at the scope, reporting lines, and the audits and consulting when you consider what SAIs do versus internal audit. So the scope of SAIs is pan-governmental. Internal auditors are more confined. They are reporting within an agency or within an entity, and they do audits of that entity in and of itself. Reporting lines, usually Parliament, usually governmental for SAIs. For the internal auditor, it's the highest governing body within the organization they work for. For instance, I work for the Texas Department of Transportation. The governor of the state of Texas appoints board members or commission members that are independent of the agency that oversee its operation and provide insight into its strategy. I report to them. They hire me, they can fire me, they do my performance evaluations, and they control my pay. The management team of the agency does not do that. So that's how I provide independence and objectivity with regard to my role. And that's an example of reporting to the highest governing body within an agency. So as far as audits and consulting, SAIs do compliance, financial, and performance audits. We do that as well in internal audit, but we also can perform consulting engagements. Those are engagements that are not audit engagements, but because of our insight and our experience and expertise in control and process, sometimes we are asked to come and evaluate something or help a division institute a new process because they know we are going to be considerate of the risks and of the controls to manage those risks that need to be installed within the systems they're trying to implement. So internal audit. Here is the IIA's mission: to enhance and protect organizational value by providing risk-based objective assurance, advice, and insight. So it goes beyond assurance, again, to provide advice and insight. The definition of auditing has been adopted by the IIA is independent objective assurance and consulting activity to add value and improve an organization's operations. So how do we improve an organization's operations, right? When you consider audit, and what you do traditionally is report on how something is functioning, what we do some performance auditing as well. So we can evaluate a process, determine whether it's being economical, whether it's effective, and provide recommendations as to how they could get better, how they could achieve more results if they were to implement processes, not necessarily controls, but new processes sometimes. So that's how we do that. The 3 lines of defense framework, some of you may have seen this. It's been adopted and it's being updated right now by the IIA. But generally speaking, if you look at all of the dark blue boxes, those are what comprise the 3 lines of defense. And basically, it's the entities that provide assurance to senior management and the governing body, which is usually a board. The first line of defense consists of management, who puts policies in place, right? That's their role. They say, we are going to operate according to this policy, and we are not going to veer from it. And they institute internal controls to ensure that that happens. The second line of defense gets a little more granular, a little more involved, and a little more detailed. And that's functions like compliance, security. Some organizations have a quality control function. It really varies depending on the type of organization that we're talking about. But they are the ones that actually do tests or monitoring of the organization to determine and ensure conformance with policy. Also to ensure conformance with procedure. So they are still considered part of the management team, not fully independent because they report within the agency, but they provide some assurance and again, some of that defense. The third line of defense, you see internal audit. So like I mentioned, in the scheme of things, internal audit's considered part of the organization. They're paid by the organization usually. So are they truly independent? You know, you could debate that. However, the reporting relationship is what's important, right? When internal audit reports to the highest governing body and cannot be influenced by management to change or give a certain result, that's what you look for when you're looking for an independent and objective internal auditor. And then outside, just to provide full perspective, you've had external auditors, regulators, you know, those entities from the outside that come in and evaluate operations. So independence, we're all familiar with this. You know, here are some examples, and I just gave you my perspective on what independence means. You know, direct and unrestricted access to senior management and the board. Functional reporting to the independent audit committee or the highest governing body, like I said. And administrative reporting, here's where the pay comes in. I report, for instance, with a dotted line to our executive director, who is like a CEO, the president of the organization. I have unrestricted access to him. He oversees HR and payroll, which have a play into how I get paid, right? But that's about it. That's the administrative relationship there that I'm talking about. Functionally, I report to the board of directors. So what's the role of the audit committee? So assuming the internal auditor reports to the audit committee or the board to approve the audit charter. Every internal auditor should have a charter, that purpose, authority, and responsibility by which they operate. That audit committee should approve the risk-based audit plan, right? Not management. They approve the budget. If I need resources, if I need consulting, if I need whatever, I should be able to go to the audit committee or the board, make my case for it, and they should be able to initiate that for me if they agree that I need it. They receive the reports from the chief audit executive. That's what CAE is. They can hire and fire the chief audit executive, approve my pay, as I mentioned, and ensure adequate resourcing. So objectivity, more a state of mind, right? When I go into an organization to audit it, I can definitely have perceptions with regard to how that organization is operating based on the manager of the organization, or turnover, or whatever variable that I choose to acknowledge at the time. But my role is to be agnostic to that, to not consider those things, right? When you audit something, it's based on data, it's based on reporting, it's based on documentation and evidence. It should not be based on what my feelings are toward the people I'm auditing. So that's an example of the objectivity I'm talking about. We must be objective. Risk-based internal auditing. It links the internal audit to the overall risk management framework of the organization. So some organizations don't have or have not adopted a risk management framework. It makes it a little more difficult if your organization has not done that, because then what you're doing is asking your management team, asking your board of directors what the risks to the organization are from their perspectives. It's not as scientific, it's not as objective, right? Because with any feedback, with any testimonial evidence comes that subjectivity, but that's what you have to do when your organization does not have that in place. So here, I know it's difficult to read, but I think you have the materials. I'll point you around. So here is a high level or a very general approach toward risk-based auditing. So on the outside of the cross, if you see, at the top you have audit, on the left you have management, and on the right you have your audit committee. Each of the entities is responsible for an output, for producing an output. The auditor at the top should be producing an overall audit strategy for the organization, right? Some people just do completely risk-based, whatever's at the top of the risk for the organization for that year. Others do cyclical audits. They want to audit everything in the organization within a certain amount of time, right? So that's the strategy that I'm talking about, the auditor implementing. Management, that's where your risk management report comes in, or your risk register. Some organizations have risk management functions, ERM functions, or risk officers that produce a risk management report that says, here are the risks to this organization achieving its objectives over the next whatever time period, and the velocity with which those risks are coming at the agency, because it helps with strategy setting and it helps with monitoring, right? And it helps management to invest their resources also. So on the right, you have audit committee, right? So they are going to establish the assurance requirements that they want. They will consider your audit strategy, they'll consider the risk management plan, and then determine, despite these things, this is what I want, internal auditor. I want your audit plan to include these elements based on the risks that I see, or based on the velocity or the direction that the organization is going. The internal auditor then has to take all of these inputs and come up with an audit plan, right? Considerate of the risk management plan, considerate of their strategy, and considerate of the audit committee's wishes. They come up with the audit plan, they perform the audits, and they do the audit, and they issue the audit reports, right? So again, a very general high-level depiction of risk-based auditing, but that gives you an idea of how internal auditors undertake their jobs. Collaboration. So, can SAIs rely on internal auditors' work, right? Of course, being an internal auditor, I would say yes. Yes, you can. But you should be careful about that, right? As with anything, I am in the position to rely on our external auditors' work or other assurance providers within the organization. We talked about the 3 lines of defense. I can sometimes go to the second line of defense and look at an inspection that they did. And I can determine whether or not it's valid. I can determine whether or not the results were managed, right, were controlled. And I can make an assessment based on those variables and say, you know, I don't need to do an inspection of this area because the second line of defense really did a pretty good job here. I'm going to rely on it, and I'm going to focus my limited resources somewhere else. The opposite could be true. I could see that the inspection was doctored. I could see that the inspection was not performed the way I would perform it, or it didn't cover the high-risk areas or high-risk items that I would have had I done an internal audit. So I could acknowledge that the inspection was done, but I don't rely on it in that case because it didn't meet my standards. That's the same thing SAI should be doing when considering whether or not they should rely on the work of internal auditors. So there are 2 concepts. There's direct reliance and direct assurance when you consider whether or not and how you're going to incorporate an internal auditor's work into your external audit work. So direct reliance is the strongest, where you actually have internal auditors working as part of the external audit team. Now, I cut to the bottom of the page. You have to have tremendous trust, right, in the internal auditor's capabilities. Some of the strengths in doing this, it involves the assignment of scope areas to internal auditors. You take them on as a part of your team. You're going to assign them a scope area. You leverage their expertise and their perspectives. As internal auditors, we know how the organization operates. We have perspectives with regard to the management team of the organization. We have perspectives with regard to the trajectory within which a certain division or operation is moving. So we can give you that insight, that you wouldn't necessarily have coming in from the outside. There's a lot of advantage to engaging an internal auditor. You allow an internal auditor to exercise professional judgment. Now, here's where it could be dangerous, right? Because when you assign a scope area to an internal auditor, in a direct reliance situation, you're saying, it's your job, go do it. You're telling them, internal auditor, you come across a situation where you're at a crossroads between whether you test more or stop testing to do something else, right? You're allowing them that flexibility to determine that. That's what I mean by professional judgment. You're having the trust that they're going to have the right judgment to act in that situation. So again, if you're not fully on board with that idea, probably direct reliance isn't something you need to be doing with the internal auditor. Or you could do a variation or a hybrid of it where you require a high level of supervisory review of the area or when they have a problem like that, when they're at a crossroads, they come to you for approval to go in the direction that they feel is needed. And again, it's more efficient use of resources for both the external party and for the entity. Because the entity is using its staff to help with the external audit. And in some situations, you can assign a percentage of the work that will then reduce the bill for the external audit being conducted. Direct assistance, this is the lower level that I was talking about, where the internal auditors work with limited testing. So you won't assign them a whole scope area, you'll assign them specific tests to perform, right? There are plenty of examples, I'm talking to auditors, you know what those might be. It involves the assignment of testing to an auditor with a high level of supervisory review, right? With any audit comes supervisory review, it's a standard. But you would treat them more like a lower level staff auditor with that higher level of supervisory review where you check support for their results. You go check that they got the support from a trusted source, things like that. Again, same thing, you consider the internal auditor's perspective, which are great. You do not allow the internal auditor to exercise professional judgment. They cannot make independent decisions, they have to come to you. And again, it still results in efficient use of resources. So trust. How do you establish trust? How do you get comfortable? So for internal auditors, you must have an external quality assessment, right? So if I'm an SAI, if I'm an external auditor, trying to decide whether or not I can rely on that internal auditor, here are the things I'd look for. Have they had an external quality assessment? Somebody from the outside who has evaluated the work of the internal auditor to ensure that it conforms with auditing standards. And I would look at multiple reports. Have they been consistent in getting those high passing grades you hope? Independence. Who do they report to? Some internal auditors report to a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, which isn't ideal. It isn't the board, right? So you consider that and whether or not you can engage them as somebody you can rely on, or maybe if you're going to rely on them anyway, what kind of work you assign to them. If they report to the CFO, maybe you don't want to assign them certain things, right? Based on your experience and knowledge. Dynamic audit results. What does the internal audit plan look like? What kind of audits do they conduct? Are they the same audits year after year? I would consider that a non-dynamic internal audit group. an audit plan, an audit, a set of audits year over year should be different when you look at an internal audit function, because the risks are different, environments are different. Just consider information technology. And over the last 5 years, all of the different types of vulnerabilities and changes we've seen in IT. If you don't see IT on the audit plan, why is that? I mean, that's a good question. That's a huge question, and would really inform whether or not you want to engage an organization like that. Staff competence, proficiency. What are the degree of credentialed employees, and what are their tenures? Does the internal audit function have a high level of turnover? You know, because what are the odds that they have the expertise and that perspective that you're looking to get if they've only been there a year? And if they have a very high attrition or turnover rate. You know, those are things, again, to consider. And then experience with the internal auditor. You know, what is your personal experience? You're going to talk to the internal auditor, you're going to get to know them, and you're going to, if you get comfortable, do some direct assistance with them, that lower level. What is your experience with them in doing that direct assistance work? Or have they become reliable? Have you been able to trust them? You know, all these things should be taken into consideration when you consider whether or not you're going to engage an internal auditor and relying on their work. And then finally, sustainable development goals. So, you know, so internal auditors, if you're not going to engage them, can still do this stuff. You know, we're joint stakeholders in good governance. We understand it, we know the importance of it, and we can help be cheerleaders for that in our organizations. We can educate and be ambassadors, validate data and reports, so you can still ask us for information if you're not going to engage us fully. We have a lot of access and a lot of information to stuff that would probably be very helpful for you to gain perspective on the entities. And again, I'll point at the resources. So many people out there who do internal auditing, a large portion of them in the government sector. So it's really a great set of skilled people that you should be engaging and talking to. And I know, again, part of the reason I'm here is to advocate for that. We want more. We want more engagement. We are happy for the evolution of auditing in Brazil, especially here firsthand that I see. I'm very excited for it. So please, you have my cards. I'm talking to these group. I'm very excited. Apologize. That was the last slide anyway. But no, I apologize for that. But really, this is a very exciting time for me. So again, thank you for your time and engagement. I'll be here for the rest of the day. And once again, congratulations to you.
International institution that collaborates a lot with the public administration and auditing. And seeking this collaboration, I became a member of the IIA and our General Secretary of External Control.
Interna do TCU também, e ele
The General Secretary of Internal Auditing is also a member, and he also encouraged his team to get certified. So it's a source of criteria and procedures to make our auditing activity more professional. So I would like to thank the participation of Benito here. Now we will watch the presentation of Marcelo Chaves. He will show a very practical case. So after all, what is that we're talking about very theoretically now? He will show an audit activity in the field. So I would like to thank Marcelo for having embraced very enthusiastically of showing this audit, this performance audit, and the department gave us lots of support, and this was a very successful work. So, Marcelo, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as Dagomar said, this was the first experience of the court on this topic. And in fact, Dagomar, more than thanking me for taking this challenge, we need to thank the staff that is here, good part of them. Lydia, Hugo, Simone, and Marilia are watching us through intranet with the support of Carvalho, Arnaldo. They were essential. We could notice that indeed a strategy of action that was very powerful, which throughout the years we have to employ even on external control. And I will show you a little bit of the result of this work. We decided to make an audit at the Ministry of Health in the processes of certification that private entities of private entities which when received this certificate, they were entitled to a fiscal exemption, a discount. And the name of the certificate is SEBAS, Certificate of Benevolent Entities of Social Assistance in Health. This certificate can be issued to entities which work in the field of social assistance and education. Well, as I said, the obtention of this certificate gives these entities the right to be benefited by these social contributions, that is, taxes that are paid. And this certification is based on a law, Federal Law 12,101 of 2009, and it demands some pre-requirements for these entities to receive them. So, for example, has to be a non-profitable legal entity. These entities need to write a agreement or contract or similar instrument with the managers of the National Health System managers, because this is a universal system. Any citizen can get health services free of charge. A third condition to obtain this certification is that these entities, they offer services to the people who are attended by the National Health System, and they should prove annually the rendering of these services. So in summary, we have here basically the entities which are benefited by this resource. We have hospitals which work with high and medium complexity. That is, these are not basic units of health. This is not a health station. It is a real hospital. And these entities, they have a counterpart to supply. In the case of high and mid complexity hospitals, they have to offer at least 60% of services, paid services by the SUS table, or they have 20% of their services have to be free of charge, or entities which fit into a specific program of the Ministry of Health. These are called excellence hospitals. This is the program of perfectioning at the National Health System. There are also two other types of entities which are not relevant here, because we focus basically on the issue of hospitals. And just to give you a notion of this magnitude of this challenge, I'd like to show you the impact to the public treasure in all areas in Brazil. In the field of health is the third area in which we have revenue waiver. In 2017, 13% of 275 billion reais were destined to health. So that's why we had the idea of doing this work. Facing this high materiality, When we analyze better the issue within the field of health, we're able to classify other main groups of waivers. And the first of them is the reimbursement that all of us taxpayers have when we make our annual income declaration. It makes about 35% of the fiscal waiver. Now, philanthropic entities is the second subgroup in which we have the second largest waiver, 6.5 billion reais in 2017. So these resources, they are destined to reimburse all the expenses paid by the citizen with the income tax, to compensate costs of services rendered by philanthropic entities, and prices of medications, which is the third largest group. So, our objective was to evaluate the regularity of the process of certification of these entities. As I said, the certificate makes the entities able to work with their expenditures for rendering the services, and we chose as a period the 7 years from 2010 to 2017. Now, the type of work that we did was a work of assurance, to supply a reasonable assurance. It implied in the definition of a risk of audit of about 5%. Just reminding that the objective of this work of assurance is to offer a trust over the information to external users, those who by themselves could not get it. To express conclusion here. Now, speaking about methodology, the work was based on performance, or actually compliance auditing norms, and the prerequisites foreseen in ISAI 4000. The first stage of our work was to identify the processes that happened to obtain this certificate, which basically are two. There is a work process of renewance of this certificate, and the entity of the Ministry of Health, which controls this process, also supervises the maintenance of the requisites that are necessary for that entity to keep benefiting from fiscal exemptions. So this is just to show you that we had to build a map of processes, which was later approved, or was the managers who are responsible for the process approved this map, and they confirmed that the flows are these, and we based on these maps, both for supervision as well as for concession, to start the works. Still speaking about methodology, we applied questionnaire of internal control evaluation, and it has as an objective to assess the structure of internal controls in a level of entity using the COSO methodology. But we adapted this methodology specifically for this department at the Ministry of Health, which is called DCEBAS, Department of Certification of Entities that are Beneficiary of Social Assistance. After applying this questionnaire, the following stage was the identification and evaluation of risks and controls. After that, effectively, we actually carried out these controls, tests, and substantive tests. So basically, these were the stages that we followed. The first one, identify the objectives determined by the unit for the policy, for the process. After that, we went to the identification of the events that could represent risk to the outreach of the objectives for the certification project. After that, evaluation of the risk events in terms of probability impact. After that, the identification of the answers implemented by the responses implemented by the Ministry of Health for these identified risks. And finally, the evaluation whether the control activities assure that the risks related are mitigated to an acceptable level. So here, it might be the most important part of the presentation, and I ask you to read some of these issues because this is part of the matrix of the risk evaluation that was produced. So we, after identifying the risks that are in this inherent risk column, the first one is the concession or renewance of certificate to an entity without any contract with the manager or with a fake or out-of-date contract, reminding that the prerequisites for the obtention of this certificate is the supply of service for the population. And how did this entity did it? Well, they had to sign a contract with the municipal, state manager. So we identify it as being something of high impact and of a high probability, because this was happening at the end in the municipality, and the manager here in Brasilia, the chance of him being tricked might be high. So we considered a high probability for this to happen, and then we calculated the inherent risk. The inherent risk for this case was extreme. Well, the ministry, in its internal control systems, they had some routines that were identified during the audit to avoid this type of, or to mitigate this risk. And what were these measures? For example, to verify the existence of a contract with the SUS manager, either by contact or by email, by phone, they have to check this contract. And then there is another procedure, which is to check the validity of this contract facing the signature of the entity leader and the SUS manager. They had to verify the power of this contract, whether this is expired or not, and to consult our official annals of the state in case of doubt about the authenticity of the contract in its terms. So the evaluation of this response and level of efficacy was considered satisfactory, and the residual risk was considered medium. And that's how it goes on. This was done for several risks that were mapped, and we were classifying them this way, as being always classifying them in terms of probability of impact, and then calculating the inherent risk and comparing this to the level of efficacy of internal controls, so that from then on we could identify which points we would evaluate in the work. Just to remind you that in our case, we split the levels of risk in 5 levels: strong, satisfactory, medium, weak, and irrelevant. So, This methodology defines that when the auditor proves preliminarily that the controls mitigate the risks, it is necessary that he is sure, because the evaluation of the matrix is a preliminary evaluation. The next step was to obtain evidence that this preliminary evaluation was true, and for this we used a focus on the efficacy test of controls, which are these right here. The team needed to test whether these risks, that is, if these responses from the administration were really being verified by the internal control systems of the Ministry of Health. If the controls were weak, they wouldn't be mitigating the risks. So the auditing team wouldn't even need to test this control. They would have to go straight to substantive tests. And the auditor, for the auditor to be sure that these controls work for these processes of certification as a whole, and not only to a sample of 6 initial processes that were made to see whether these controls were being applied, we needed to use a statistical sample. I'll have to run a bit because my time is running out. Focus on test of efficacy and control. So with regards to the samples, we chose a level of confidence of 95%, a tolerable deviation of 5%, and a hoped deviation of 1%. We chose 93 processes of control, actually concession processes. And for the concession work processes, we analyzed 23 attributes of interest, and for the processes of supervision, there were another 15. Now, this table shows how we tabulated the data. So here, for example, these are the real processes, all the 93 real processes. And for each point of interest here, attribute of interest, we performed the tests, and this test is based on a methodology foreseen in the manual of the American Institution of Auditor Certification, Accountant Auditors. And this S means yes, it means to say that the control works or not. So in all of these processes that were analyzed, we found minimal deviations, and we were able to conclude that the controls were being well executed. On the substantive tests that were carried out, the level of confidence was also 5%, and tolerable deviation 1%, and intended deviation 0%. We also tabulated all these tests, which in fact were tests to evaluate whether the amount of services rendered to the population, to the citizen who went after the hospital, if indeed what was declared by the entity indeed happened. So the team recalculated this test of production and then made an external confirmation. And then we came to a table similar to this, in which we have for each entity that was certified, that wanted to renew its certification, the test made by internal control for cases of hospitalization, and what we found. So we compared the tests. You can see that the differences, maybe the biggest difference was this one, but in all of them, the parameters were within what is foreseen by the norm. So we were able to conclude that the real rate of deviation did not overcome the tolerable deviation, and the results made evident that at least 95% of the entities certified by the Ministry of Health during this period of 2010 to 2017 fulfilled all the requirements demanded in all relevant aspects. So the conclusion we came to at the end of the work was that the process is regular and the ministry is actually doing a good job, because it is not easy to make all these verifications. In case you want to know better this process with all description of the methodologies and spreadsheets that were generated, it is available through this accord, this agreement 683 of 2018 plenario. And I just wanted to, before I finish, I'd like to share with you an interesting data that shows the degree of detail and the level of commitment that the teams have to carry out this type of work. We made some mathematical calculations before the presentation, and considering the amount of tests that were carried out by process, we come to the conclusion that were approximately 2,400 tests made by the team, a four-member team. So it is an extensive work that is worthwhile. The result was considered to be excellent. And I thank the opportunity, and I thank my staff for their commitment. And thank you very much, Dagomar.
So, two very good news. One, that was a success, and the second, the certification process of the SEBA works, which is an excellent news. I would like to know from the receptionist if we have questions for the speakers. Does anyone have any question? We're a little behind our schedule. I think we're like 27 minutes behind our schedule. But at the end, we will have some time, 20 minutes for discussions. We have now to make these questions. We can now collect all of the questions and do a Q&A Q&A session afterwards. Now we will break for 10 minutes so that we can keep up with our schedule. Due to the time, we will have only 10 minutes of coffee break. Thank you.
Oi. Som. Senhoras e senhores, por gentileza, queiram ocupar os seus lugares. Solicitamos que as senhoras e os senhores retomem os seus lugares para darmos início ao próximo painel. Senhoras e senhores, solicitamos a gentileza em retomarem os seus lugares. Por gentileza, senhoras e senhores, ocupem os seus lugares para darmos continuidade aos trabalhos desta tarde. Senhoras e senhores, lembramos mais uma vez.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Questions must be written down and handed to our receptionists. They will be answered at the end of the panel. We also request you to inform in the form your email, so that in case there is no time for replying your question, the speaker can do so via email. We will now start the second panel. For this panel, we invite the Federal Auditor of External Control of the TCU, Mrs. Paula Dutra, to moderate the panel. We also invite Mrs. Barbara Dutzler, the coordinator of the GIZ Africa program. Also, we invite the specialist in public finance management of the World Bank, Mr. Eric Brintet. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator has the floor. Thank you, everyone. We will continue our seminar. The two institutions that we have invited for the second part of the seminar will bring a more systemic perspective, and also will give an idea of the risks and the problems that we find and the solutions for these problems. Both the GIZ and the World Bank are institutions, are partner institutions in the Committee of Professional Standards, and brings this perspective of external stakeholders for the creation of regulations for Intosai. Now we will start with Mr. Eric Brintet. He is the specialist in public finance management of the World Bank for
I will speak English.
Eu vou falar em português. Eu sou novo aqui no Brasil, então não tive muito tempo de aprender a língua, mas prometo me esforçar. O assunto é o ciclo de PFM e também as ações sistêmicas para as FS e oportunidades para melhorar os resultados. Quando eu trabalhava para a OTAN, alguns colegas das instituições de auditoria do Reino Unido,
they were explaining that before we didn't know how to work, and after Audit 21 it's going to be extraordinary. That's why I'm talking about this, because when I received the subject of this presentation, I was a little skeptical about what systemic can mean. Is it another kind of buzzword that everybody uses to look fashionable and up to date? So I wondered about this. What does systemic mean? So, how is it working? This one? Okay, good. So I will start with a little memory, some souvenirs. Then Systemica, what is that? Wondering about what can it mean for audit approach? Is it a hassle? Is it a buzzword? So let's start with this. If you say, for instance, that according to a US study, successful reforms combine a systemic approach with a programmatic vision, that aims at building resilience with disruptive technologies like blockchain. It sounds good, it's typical buzzword, that's why I wanted to first try to understand what systemic can mean. So let's start with the PFM cycle. If you consider the criteria for what a system is, it's interdependence. And so, yeah, this is the agenda, sorry. So we start with the PFM, Gestão das Finanças Públicas, to show that it's a system. The question of the bird's eye view, general vision of audit. Then where to put the cursor, I will explain this later on. The question of results, that's part of the subject. And the question of program budgeting and public performance and conclusions. So the first criteria of a system is the interdependency, the fact that the different parts of the system are depending on one another. And in this sense, the process of public financial management are all interlinked. And of this, I'm sure you know as much as I do about this. It starts with the macroeconomic framework that gives the overall framework for the budgeting. Then it follows up with the preparation and approval of the budget. Then the execution of the budget with the various components, the public procurement, operational budget, operating expenditures, and payroll and salaries, and through the cash management and the various accounting processes. So the audit comes after all that, and it's not coming up during all the process, but only at the end, after the financial reporting. I mean the financial audit, of course, because this is my subject. But the thing is that even if the auditors only intervene in the last part of the cycle, they actually make observations and recommendations on the overall system. And that's what makes the financial audit a systemic approach. So you can add to this the true and fair view, the concept of true and fair view, that also gives an overall view and a systemic approach of the financial audit. So it shows that this systemic approach is not a buzzword, it's really something that fits with the financial audit. This is a Chinese proverb that everybody may know, but maybe you don't. So when a wise man points at the moon, the imbecile examines the finger, which means that you should never lose the overall vision when performing audits, and I will elaborate on that. First, the thing is to adapt the audit to the existing system. What I mean is that it's equally ineffective to apply computerized audit technique to a mainly manual PFM process, which can happen in remote places or in some countries where the PFM processes are not computerized, or to use manual audit with computerized PFM systems. So it's very important to adapt the audit to the existing system, and this is also part of the systemic vision. I remember a colleague in my previous lives who went to sampling immediately without having questioned himself about the relevance of the population he was sampling from, and whether they were actually representing the whole of the transactions he had to examine. So it's the kind of things that, you know, you look at the finger instead of having the overall view. The second is to understand the activity of the organization. What I mean is that when you audit a public entity like a municipality or a state agency, you always have to keep in mind that it's a non-profit organization, it's a non-profit entity, and that you should not copy-paste some visions that come from the private sector world or things like that. Oh, sorry. And it's very important to remember the scope and the limits of the financial audit. What I mean is that the scope is a financial due diligence, compliance audit, and the true and fair view. This is the scope of the financial audit. And what about the limits? The fact is the financial audit is not administration, it's not advisory, and it's not prior action, prior audit, prior control, or prior review, but only ex post. And to remember, this is also part of the systemic approach, that the audit is not a fin, is not an end in itself, which means that the systemic approach does not mean confusion. That's what I mean, so keep the overall, the bird's eye view. Do not look at the finger. Where to put the cursor? So I try to understand the relationship between financial audit and performance audit. And you can draw this diagram. It's a little rule of thumb, but I propose it to your reflection. On the right-hand side, in blue, you have the financial audit. I named it hard because it's hard data. It's invoice ticking. It's processes about checking the quality of financial reporting. And on the left, you have the soft, which is something that you could compare to the work of a journalist. So when you do performance audit, if you don't stick to the hard data, you may go to journalistic work. And if you do financial audit without keeping the bird's eye view and the overall vision, you may go to something very dry that will be understood and read only by the specialists. So what I mean is the truth is sometime in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle between the hard data of financial audit and the soft data of performance audit. You need to you need to find the right way, using the hard data for performance audit and using the bird's eye view of performance audit to make financial audit a little less dry. That's what I mean. Then the results. We have many problems with the results in the World Bank as well. When you think of results and audit, you think more about performance audit or value for money audit than pure financial audit. And of course, the question is PFM for service delivery. This is a big hassle in the World Bank. We always talk about PFM for service delivery and say you have to do PFM for service delivery to understand that. Say, okay, is there any PFM that's not for service delivery, actually? That's my question. So if you say that PFM is like a road, when the road is bumpy, half destroyed like this one, of course, the car of service delivery will not go through, it will not carry much, and certainly will not arrive on time. And when the road is nice, then the service delivery car can go quickly and deliver actually a quality service to citizens. So what I mean is, for the results, every time you improve PFM, either through audit, through your recommendations, your conclusions, whether they're followed or not, we try to improve the PFM system, the overall PFM system. We are working for results and we are working for service delivery. Yes, so some results are easy to measure, and when it's the case for instance, for large anti-fraud operations, you say we have saved that much money, you can display the results, that's fine. It's also true for the reforms of procurement. You can say that you have saved that much money in improving the procurement processes or the systems of payroll. When you say we have identified 2,000 ghost workers and deleted them from the payroll, we have saved that much money to the state, is easy. For others, it's a little more challenging. Of course, it's difficult to tell whether, to what extent the improvement of PFM systems can actually improve the quality of healthcare or the quality of education. But this, of course, is another story. What I mean is that in my opinion, PFM is always for results. Sometimes for external counterpart and external stakeholders, you have to demonstrate that, although it's obvious and self-evident, but you have to demonstrate and prove that you are working with PFM for service delivery. Last systemic action for financial audit and for supreme audit institutions, the system of program budgeting and measure of public performance. So the idea of public performance management through program budgeting is to make the public manager more responsible, giving them a clear mission that's clearly identified and clearly bounded, with objectives and means, the adequate means, of course, and to evaluate their performance with result indicators. In this, the Supreme Audit institutions, of course, they certify the accounts of the government. They also can carry out performance audits and participate in the evaluation of public policies. This also is a systemic approach, since it goes with the overall system and it gives the SAIs something that goes beyond the purely financial audit, even if it starts again with financial audit, with the certification of accounts. So it's another illustration of the interdependency between the financial audit and performance audit in a systemic approach. That's it. So the conclusions, it means that a systemic approach is all about interdependency between the various components of audit, performance audit, financial audit, and also between all the components of the PFM system. Systemic approach and systemic audit means overall vision, the bird's eye view, to always keep an eye on the moon and not on the fingers, which means that the auditors should always think about the overall consequences of their action. Complementarity between the various types of audit, and never lose sight of the common good, because audit is not an end in itself, but it is for the general service of the government and the citizens. Thank you.
Nossa última apresentação da tarde, e o grilo aqui foi de propósito para chamar a atenção de quem já estava cansado, acordar. Pois é, desculpa. E eu acho que um ponto muito interessante que o Eric falou foi a ligação entre a gestão de finanças públicas, a necessidade da boa gestão de finanças públicas para a entrega de resultados. E essa é exatamente a premissa do projeto que a Bárbara vai, do instrumento, da ferramenta que a Bárbara vai apresentar para a gente agora. E isso está dentro também, para voltar um pouquinho, quando a gente estava falando de normas, existe uma norma da Intosai que fala da importância das entidades fiscalizadoras superiores demonstrarem seu valor e benefício para a sociedade, para o cidadão. Então, mostrar essa ligação também entre a boa gestão de finanças públicas e a entrega de resultados.
Good finance management and the delivery of results is one of our goals to show our value as an organization. And if you have questions, you can already hand them to our receptionists so that we can make the questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
All right. I have now the honor of...
Ok, eu agora tenho a honra de fazer a última apresentação e eu sinceramente espero que vocês ainda estejam acordados e comigo, mas também tenho um consolo, se por acaso vocês dormirem, a culpa não é minha, é vocês é que estão cansados.
I think I could not have wished for a better talker before me, because you really set the stage for what I want to do, is to take you from that systemic perspective of or on PFM in general to, no, not yet, Yes, to a more specific application, as Paula already introduced, we have worked with AfroSci now very intensively on an instrument to allow SIs to more holistically look at risks in the PFM sector. And one of the questions really is like how big is your risk appetite, or is there a risk at all in the PFM system? So what I want to talk about is like, are we talking about risk, or is actually PFM system failure a reality that we're all facing? And I would very much pledge for the fact that it is a reality. So in case it is a reality, the question then is like, how exactly are supreme audit institutions contributing to an oversight of that systemic failure? And as last, then a short proposition on how we are trying to address that issue. So what we are seeing, or what we can observe, is that we have a service delivery crisis. And I mean, you were talking about the road, and that needs to be in place for service delivery to happen, but there's a lot of things that happen at the same point in time, and that these points here come from a McKinsey study from 2017, but I suppose you've all seen them and experienced them in very different or similar forms. I would like to zoom in maybe on the third bullet point here, which is the government deficits that are increasing to grow. So we have a worldwide shrinking fiscal space, and at the same time growth is slowing down, the populations are growing, there's rising inequalities, and we all know what rising inequality actually means to our democracies, and the threat that because politics then have to actually target two very opposing or and even contradicting strands of population, and of course corruption scandals and inefficiencies. So if we zoom in at the shrinking fiscal space, we actually have the issue that with growing expenditure and shrinking revenues, the point is then we don't get a balance anymore, and the balance would be between the long-term inflows and the net worth of the public assets versus the expenditure and the debt service. And in that situation then, I needed to go back a bit in terms of a Nobel laureate who wrote this already, I think, in 1968. But he reminds us, and it's James Buchanan, he reminds us that the tendency in democracy is for utility maximizing politicians to borrow and spend rather than to tax and to spend much rather than little. So with these things, I think public financial management is at the core of these issues. And for anything that we can do to contribute, we need to improve public financial management as a key leadership objective. And focal areas there would be procurement, state-owned enterprises, and project management, data analysis, HR, human capacity. These are core areas. And I looked back a bit for Brazil. If you look for PEFA, which is the standard public expenditure financial accountability assessment, it was, I think, the one that was done on a federal level was done in 2009. So that's quite some time back. And Brazil was rated extremely well. You had more A ratings, which is the best rating than Norway at that point in time. But at the same point in time, all the other areas that were not A-rated were actually rated really low, on the lowest grade. And these are core risk areas in the area of fiscal risks, accounting standards, legislative scrutiny of external audit reports, or put together the control of fiscal risks. Coming from Africa, we did a bit of research to look in where are the areas of the biggest risks in PFM. And it concentrated really on procurement. Procurement in different forms, but also on the budget execution sides, on accounts reconciliation, controls of payroll, or also on the planning side and budget credibility as such. So with this, actually, I think it becomes really important that supreme audit institutions look into what they actually already know So if you analyze and assess what is in your entity level financial reports, in your performance audits, and if you try to say, but for the whole of government, what are the most relevant risks? And then report that and debate that, because you need to know what you actually already know. We've debated that with parliamentarians in Africa, and along the following questions. So to what extent are underlying systemic weaknesses causing the day-to-day malperformance that you're witnessing? Do you know the risk areas for your PFM systems? Have you seen an improvement over time? And is government actually implementing the Parliament's resolutions? Is your Supreme Audit Institution a competent partner? So, and if you have doubts on any of those questions, then actually I think it really is high time to do something about it. We did some further discussions and we said, okay, if we have to constate that there's a lack of follow-up to audit reports and that you're reporting every year the same findings and again the next year the same findings and nothing changes in the system, then why is that so? And for a couple of things you cannot do much, because if there's a lack of political will to make the necessary changes, then that is a serious limitation to your effectiveness. But if it's actually related to your entry point, the language that you are using, the way your reports are understood and interpreted, and if you actually understand where the problem that you're seeing comes from a systemic perspective, then we can tackle those areas. And with that, create a bigger momentum for change. The AfroSci English-speaking Supreme Audit Institutions on a governing board then agreed that we needed to look at a PFM common reporting framework as a simple concept with a common understanding, to look at systemic risks, to categorize findings and aggregate and compare the results among size. And so the instrument that we came up with tries to identify the most relevant PFM risks present in the country. And it draws, and that's the real innovation, it draws on the information that you have already collected in your audits, and not only in the financial audits, but also on the performance side. And so it guides you then in making a systemic, thematic synthesis across the individual entities that SI audits. And the benefits then would be that the tool highlights weaknesses for each department or entity. And you have then a graphic picture, which would, if I speed forward a bit, I'll give in a second. But the point is there actually to look at what makes the essence of the system. And it's easy to look at a law or to say you have a regulation on a medium-term expenditure framework. But the question is, does that really contain the way in which the budget is spent over a three-year or 5-year perspective? Does it really have an impact? Is the system functioning? So you would need to look into the results that that area is supposed to generate and ask yourself, is it generating that? So if you look at the 3 aims that any public financial system has, which is financial sustainability, to ensure that you're not overspending, which is to ensure that government policy is being implemented and that you have service delivery, then you would need to look into the essence of each of these processes. What are they supposed to actually be doing? So are your spending decisions affordable? Does the spending reflect the budget as it was approved? And do you have, for instance, the quality procurement executed as planned? Or do you see issues in these areas? So, and if you do that, you can actually look then over the cycle and see which is the weakest of the areas. Is it the forecasting part? Is it the preparation or the approval part? Or is it the financial management and service delivery part? And which of your institutions are stronger and which ones are weaker? We can also look at, and that's for us is the most important part, on the sustainable development goals. Are you actually making an improvement here? And the tool reports on the deviation between the budget proposal and the actual expenditure, which is an indicator under the SDG 16. And it also monitors the integration of sustainable development goals into planning of the budget and also budget execution and monitoring. So we're proposing the tool to use as a reporting framework, as the name already says. And there it can be a chapter in an annual report, or it can be a performance report on PFM, or it can contribute to any cross-cutting analysis that you're supporting. It can also be used, obviously, in audit planning, because if you understand the risks and you have a systemic understanding of the weaknesses that you encounter, then you can put that into use for your annual audit planning or specific questions. And in analytics and research, because you can look into the change of performance over time. We are currently busy with rolling out the framework with a lot of the countries within the African region, but also with the, so that would be the English-speaking countries with AfroSAI, but also the Lusophone-speaking and the Francophone coming. And we are, the last 2 days, we've had talks with the TCO management, and we'll be looking into the possible use of the tool as well, to get some feedback from your point of view on the usefulness in aggregating findings that you have on weaknesses in PFM systems. Yeah, for us the next steps is to use the tool in aggregating it for the high-level panel forum and INTOSAI, or in this case the upcoming INCOSAI report, because the Sustainable Development Goals have been a topic on the last INCOSAI, and now it's time to report on the progress in the approaches that INTOSAI has been taking. And this initiative is part of the approach on SDG 16, which is the effective and efficient and transparent institutions. We'd also like to see if we consolidate the findings, what on an individual country level comes out in terms of the weaknesses, but also how that aggregates, and what type of weaknesses are actually the most prominent one across the region or between regions, so you can see where the main points are that then policymakers need to address. Yeah, I think with that, I'd like to conclude with our vision that drives this whole process. And I think it's really important to have a side that is knowledgeable of the PFM environment in which it is. And not only to be knowledgeable, but actually to contribute it, to actively participate and shape it and improving it. Because right now this is mostly left to external stakeholders, to people who do the assessments, like the PFA assessment that I cited in the beginning. And it's the Supreme Audit institutions who hold a lot of the information. You know already so much, but you need to know what you know. You need to put it together and put it in a way that actually stakeholders that do not speak your language, but they speak a different language. So you need to translate that into a language that they can understand and present it in a different way. And from there on, I think we can at least contribute to minimizing this lack of follow-up of the audit reports that we're seeing throughout. Actually, all of the Supreme Audit institutions have the similar problem. But with that, we also would deliver upon SDG 16.4, the effective, efficient, and transparent institutions. Thank you for your attention.
Estão todos cansados, as nossas apresentações foram muito boas.
So I'll call Dagomar to close our afternoon. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I will not make another presentation. This is just a goodbye and a thank. We did this seminar, and the
fio condutor do seminário foi risco, né? Vocês devem ter percebido.
You probably noticed it under several aspects. So we started with a view of the normatizing entities, a view over what are the norms of auditing, how they can contribute. Then we went to a view from the audit itself, the engagement and the specific work. And we also had a broader view from outside the control or entities, but which talked to the control entities and received many messages with regards to the auditing work, the difficulty to translate our findings into effective measures of perfectioning. So these are our partners, the World Bank, GIZ. The World Bank is part of the PFC committee, the Committee of Professional Standards, as an observer. The IIA also. We had the pleasure of receiving today uh, from an external point of view the control, how we can perfect our activities as well. I think that we also were able to give a significance to this risk. What does it effectively reflect into the practice of auditing, integrating, for example, the team for helping with us. And I'd like to thank everyone here present for the opportunity to participate in our second international seminar of auditing. I hope that next year we have another one with a different interesting topic to contribute with all our activities. So thank you very much and you have a nice afternoon. You